I've never been kissed. The fractured confession slipped from the lips of Eliza, the black woman the whole town branded as a curse. Inside her weathered shack, she had grown used to scornful glances and whispered slurs that cut her pride to ribbons, leaving her heart raw as if carved open by a knife. But on that night of heavy snow, when a thunderous knock rattled the door, a young man collapsed upon her threshold, blood blooming red against the white drift. Trembling, Eliza dragged him inside, unaware that moment would tear apart the walls of solitude that had caged her for years and ignite a love bold enough to defy the entire town. Wyoming, the winter of 1876. Wind swept down from the Bighorn Mountains, driving blades of snow into the valley, slipping through every crack in the wood, slicing into every seam of clothing. The ramshackle cabin where Eliza Brown lived stood alone on the edge of town, a black smudge against the white sweep of snow. Its walls leaned on one another like weary shoulders, its gaps whistling as if mocking the one who called it home. Eliza, a black woman of about 30, had been here for years, ever since her parents succumbed to the wave of consumption that tore through the frontier. She was only 19 then, just old enough to understand that solitude wasn't a passing season, but a sentence without end. From that time forward, no one truly wanted to come near her. Some whispered that her parents' deaths had been punishment, that her family carried a curse. The crueler ones said her dark eyes could strip away a man's fortune if he lingered too long in their gaze. Work had come and gone like snowdrifts in the wind. She had scrubbed laundry, cooked in a boarding house, swept floors in the parsonage. Each place lasted only a few months before whispers spread. Children fell sick, men lost coin, and somehow her presence was blamed. In a land where superstition outweighed any law, rumor was as heavy as a judge's gavel. At night, Eliza sat before the meager fire, staring into the flames as if they were her only companion. No husband, no children, no soul to share a scrap of talk with. In the silence, she sometimes felt her mother's warm hand on her shoulder again, or heard her father's rough voice spinning a tale after a long hunt. But the clearer the memory, the sharper the emptiness. She had thought of leaving many times, starting fresh where her name meant nothing. Yet she always stayed, chained by habit, fear, or some quiet surrender to fate. That winter, word spread of a dance at the town hall. It was the rare night folks could forget the cold and the grind of frontier living. The lamps would be lit, the fiddle bow sawing lively tunes, boots stomping the wooden floor, corn liquor passed around, and hands joined in clumsy warmth. Eliza had avoided such gatherings before. She knew she'd never be asked to dance. Tall, strong-limbed, her face marked with a proud sharpness. Yet to the townsfolk she was only the black woman who lived alone at the edge of nowhere. But that night, perhaps driven by the suffocating silence of her cabin, perhaps by a stubborn will to face her fear, she went. She put on a faded blue dress, the last thing her mother left her, its hem worn but stitches still neat. She looked into a cracked piece of mirror. The eyes staring back weren't innocent anymore, nor bitter, only marked by years of endurance. She pulled a wool scarf around her neck, shrugged on a coat frayed at the shoulders, and stepped into the snow. The town hall blazed like a beacon on the dark prairie. Wagons and horses crowded outside, laughter and chatter spilling from the doorway. The moment Eliza entered, the room faltered. The fiddle did not stop, but its tune stumbled. Boots hesitated mid-step. Dozens of eyes swung toward the doorway, where she stood with snow still melting in her hair. No one greeted her. Women leaned into each other, whispering behind half-hidden smiles. A few men glanced her way and quickly looked off, as if her presence soured the warmth of the evening. Eliza straightened her back and walked in slow, her old shoes creaking against the boards. She sat along the bench against the wall, making herself small. Lamplight cast her shadow long across the floor, an extra figure no one wanted. Children peered, only to be pulled away by their mothers. Eliza pressed her hands together in her lap. The music swelled again. The dance spun lively, laughter rising like smoke. But around her, the silence held. An old woman with silver hair and a thick wool shawl sat by the window, watching her. She shook her head, and with a whisper meant for one ear, but carried like a draft across the room, said, "She's too old now. No one would choose her." The words slid into Eliza's chest like a clean knife. She did not turn, but her heart recoiled. She had heard rumors and slanders all her life, but under the glow of lamps, amid the laughter and music, the truth of it struck harder. To them, she was not a woman to be loved. She was a shadow, a thing to be pitied at best. Eliza drew in a long breath. Her eyes followed the dancers, the clasped hands, the shy smiles. Loneliness pressed tight in her throat, but beneath it a faint flame stirred. Could it be that even if the town cast her aside, she might still find a path of her own? She did not know it then, but the night she heard the words, "Too old, no one would choose her," would not be her ending. It would be the beginning of a story that would shake the very town that turned its back on her. That night, wind poured down from the distant mountains, crying through the cracks of the cabin like voices in mourning. Smoke from half-burned logs clung thick in the air. Eliza sat alone beside the oil lamp, its faint glow trembling across her sun-darkened face. The small fire in the hearth gave just enough warmth to hold back the emptiness pressing in on the room. A jagged crack split the glass of the window, and through it the winter wind crept in, biting her cheek as if to remind her the frontier never spared the weak. She set her calloused hand against the crack. Cold spread through her palm, and a sigh broke loose from her chest, dragging with it years of silence. Her voice rose, so low it was almost only for herself. "I've never been kissed. Not once." The words fell like a stone into a dry well, swallowed by the stillness. Outside the wind howled, prairie grass clattered, carrying her confession back at her with cruel mockery. The cabin had always been hollow, but now it felt vast, echoing with the truth she had buried too long. She closed her eyes, and in that darkness, memories flickered. Nights of town dances she had watched from the doorway, her cheap shoes dusted with mud, her hands clutching her shawl, while white girls were swept into the lamplight. Banjo strings twanged, boots pounded, laughter rose, and all of it seemed a world she could never enter. For years, she had taught herself silence, taught herself never to hope. Yet in this one unguarded moment, truth broke free. No arms had ever held her. No lips had ever sought her own. The oil lamp sputtered. Her shadow wavered across the plank wall, trembling as though it shared her breath. Outside, the sky swirled black, snow falling heavier, blanketing the cabin roof. Such a night might have passed in heavy stillness if not for the sound. Thump, thump, thump. The door shook under sudden pounding. Eliza startled, the lamp quivering with her. Her heart hammered. In this town, no one came knocking, least of all on a storm-wrung night. She rose, each step heavy. The knocking came again, urgent, desperate. She set her hand to the latch, hesitation freezing her fingers. Wind shrieked outside, and through it came the wild scream of a horse, then fading hoofbeats. A shadow fell across the door. A body slumped hard against the frame. Eliza flung the latch and pulled the door wide. A blast of snow roared in. On her threshold lay a man, young, blood staining his coat a dark crimson. His face was pale as death, breath ragged, horse gone and only trampled snow left behind. She dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as they touched his arm. Heat pulsed from the wound, hot and terrible against her palm. Instinct screamed with fear, but something deeper whispered. If she left him there, his life would slip away before dawn. "Oh, Lord," Eliza whispered, gripping him tighter. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, cloudy but clinging to the last edge of awareness. His lips cracked a few words through the storm's roar. "Don't let me sleep." The plea struck her like a spark. With sudden strength she didn't know she had, Eliza dragged him inside and slammed the door against the gale. The room filled with the sound of heavy breathing and the scrape of his weight across the floorboards. She laid him on her worn mattress by the fire. Flame light fell across his features. He was young, no more than 30. Sweat beading his brow though the cold raged outside. His hair, dark gold, was plastered with snowmelt. Eliza fetched a basin of water, the last scraps of clean cloth. Her hands were clumsy but fierce as she tore his shirt open. The wound gaped from shoulder to chest, blood still seeping. She pressed hard with cloth, crimson soaking fast through her fingers. He groaned low, but did not fight. His eyes opened once more, catching hers in the lamplight, seeing in her face both fear and resolve. "Eliza," he murmured, before slipping into darkness. Her heart lurched. He had spoken her name. How could he know? The question was lost to the wind screaming beyond the walls. All that mattered now was keeping him alive. She pressed and pressed, changing cloths until the bleeding slowed. Every motion carried both terror and determination. For the first time in years, her solitude was broken, not by pity, not by rumor, but by the raw presence of another life depending wholly on her hands. The night stretched on. Snow fell, sealing the valley, erasing the world. In the cabin, the fire snapped, its glow touching two figures. The woman no one had chosen, and the cowboy fate had dropped upon her doorstep. Outside, the frontier remained cruel and cold, but within these four walls, the fight for breath lit a fragile warmth. Eliza sat at his side, wiping sweat from his brow, whispering as though to herself, "You have to live, so I'll never have to speak those words again." She could not know it then, but fate had shifted. The confession she had let slip into the night, the knock that split the silence. These were the first steps of a story neither she nor the town would ever forget. Eliza dragged him inside, the rotten door thudding shut behind them, muting the wind's wolfish howls across the prairie. The cabin was no larger than a few paces end to end, its warped boards groaning as the gale pressed through every crack, making the lamp flame quiver. She had never laid hands on a white man before, and the shock of it sent her heart hammering like a drum. The wound at his shoulder ran deep, blood soaking the leather of his coat. She fumbled for a dull knife, cutting the cloth away. The stench of rusted metal and iron tang of blood rose sharp in the air, churning her stomach. Her hands shook, but she boiled water, set what rags she had nearby. No one else would save him. That task had fallen to her alone. Daniel groaned, lips moving without sound, breath ragged. His face had gone chalk pale, cold sweat beading across his brow. For a moment, Eliza saw how fragile a man could be beneath the weight of a western winter. One cut, one storm, one unlucky night, and it all could end. She threaded a needle, hands trembling. The first stitch made him seize and grit his teeth, yet his eyes stayed open, locked on her face as if memorizing each line. That gaze left her breathless. She had lived her life beneath turned backs and whispers. Never once had anyone looked at her without scorn or pity, until now. The wind clawed at the roof, tearing loose a metallic shriek from the old tin. Eliza sewed on, the stitches uneven, but slowly the bleeding eased. By the last knot, her hands were numb, yet something unfamiliar stirred inside her, a trembling mixture of fear and quiet relief. She pulled a thin quilt over him, then sat back against the table, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. His breathing came harsh at first, then softened, lids drooping. She thought he had slipped into sleep, when his voice rasped suddenly from the dark. "What's your name?" She froze. It had been years since anyone asked. Her answer came like a breath of wind. "Eliza Brown." Daniel gave the faintest nod before surrendering to unconsciousness. That night, she did not sleep. She sat by the fire, eyes straying to the cot where he lay. Each shallow breath he drew kept her awake, a fragile rhythm reminding her she was no longer alone. For once, another presence in her shack was not a burden, but something near to warmth. Outside, the blizzard roared on, burying the land in white. Inside, two strangers shared a fragile lifeline. By dawn, pale light seeped through the cracks. Eliza stepped outside. The prairie lay drowned beneath snow so bright it burned the eyes. Daniel's horse was gone, lost to the storm, only a trail of blood and hoof prints fading into the distance. A shiver gripped her shoulders. Whatever had brought him here bleeding was still out there. When she returned, Daniel still burned with fever. She ladled thin porridge into his mouth, her hand brushing his hot skin, startling her with the intimacy of it. His eyes cracked open, weak but steady. "Thank you," he whispered. 2 words, so simple yet rare. Most who spoke to her only barked orders, chased her off, or ignored her altogether. But here, in the frozen cabin, a white man bleeding out had offered gratitude. Days passed. Daniel stirred more each morning, though he spoke little. When his eyes opened, they searched for her first, as if to be sure she remained. She gave him water, changed bandages, wiped sweat, and each act left her heart wavering between unease and something she could not name. One evening, the storm easing beyond the walls, his voice broke the quiet. "Why? Do you live here alone?" Eliza hesitated. She had never told anyone. But his eyes, bright in the firelight, drew the truth from her. She spoke of the sickness that took her parents, of the jobs she lost because folks said she carried misfortune, of the dances where laughter and fiddles filled the air while she stood in the doorway, unseen. Daniel listened without interruption, only nodding slowly. When she fell silent, he murmured, "It isn't you that brings bad luck. It's the world that's cruel. The words burned hot behind her eyes. It had been so long since anyone spoke to her without blame. But with simple recognition, time moved slow. The blizzard broke, leaving thick white drifts across the land. Daniel grew strong enough to sit, sometimes even help split a log or carry water, though his wound pulled at every motion. Still, his presence changed the air in the cabin, softened its edges. For the first time in years, Eliza did not feel invisible. Yet beneath the fragile warmth lurked unease. She knew he had not collapsed on her threshold by chance. Something beyond those snowfields had driven him to her door, bleeding, hunted perhaps, and it would come again. That night, as Daniel dozed by the fire, lamplight gilding his calm face, her own whispered words from nights before haunted her. "I've never been kissed, not once." But now the confession felt less like despair, more like a marker of what life had been before this stranger appeared. She pulled her shawl tight, whispering into the dark, "If you've brought the storm with you, then maybe I've no choice but to face it too." And the wind slipped through the doorframe's cracks, answering her like an unseen witness. Morning light poured through the fractured pane, washing across Daniel's pale face. Eliza sat in the wooden chair beside him, shadows heavy under her eyes from a night without rest. She was unaccustomed to sharing her silence with a stranger, least of all a wounded man stretched upon her cot. Yet through the long hours, her heart had beaten in time with his ragged breaths. She told herself that if he made it through the night, come morning she would find a way to return him to town. Daniel stirred, blinking against the brightness. His gaze found hers and held it, not with the gratitude of a rescued man, but with something more intent, as if he were trying to memorize her features. Flustered, Eliza turned away, busying herself with the blood-stained rags. "Thank you," his voice rasped, low and hoarse. "I owe my life to you." She gave a small nod, no answer. Pouring water, she set the cup into his hand. Their fingers brushed. She recoiled, while his eyes lingered on her every movement as though she were more than medicine. By afternoon, with his strength a little steadier, Eliza resolved to fetch laudanum from the apothecary. In a town so small, there was no escaping the curious stares. The moment she stepped inside, the whispers gathered like vultures. "Look there. She thinks herself our equal. Slave blood dreaming foolish dreams. Perhaps that's why a stranger's hiding in her shack." Eliza bit down hard, lips sealed. She had taught herself to walk through scorn as through a sandstorm, head neither bowed nor lifted, simply passing on. Yet each word cut, reopening scars that had never healed. When she returned with the packet of medicine, the sneers still echoed in her ears. The lamp flickered low over Daniel, now propped against the wall. His eyes followed her expectantly. She set the parcel down, turned to retreat, but his voice stilled her. "I am no nameless drifter." She stopped short, surprised. "My name is Daniel McGraw," he said evenly, like a stone breaking the surface of still water. "Youngest of the McGraws, from the ranch north of here." The room froze. The lamplight wavered, casting long shadows on the wall. Eliza went rigid. That name was a crown in most mouths. The McGraws owned herds that blackened the plains and land as far as the eye could see. Judges, preachers, merchants, everyone bent to their favor. But for Eliza, the name was a scar. Years ago, as a girl with a dress borrowed and mended, she had dared dream of entering an autumn dance. She never made it past the door. A McGraw had driven her off with words sharp as whips. "We won't stain our gathering with mongrel blood." From that night on, she understood. Some doors would never open for her, not for the color of her dress, but for the color of her skin. And now, the man lying in her bed bore that same name, yet he was the only one who had ever looked at her without disdain. Eliza turned away, masking the tremor in her chest. Daniel pressed on, his voice steady but earnest. "I know what folks say, but I am not them." A bitter laugh escaped her, brittle as the wind through warped planks. "Not them. That name makes the town bow its head. To me, it's nothing but doors slammed shut." Silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the lamp. His eyes softened, sorrow flickering there. "Then let me prove it different," he said quietly. "I didn't come here for privilege. I came as a man who nearly lost his life, and you gave it back." Her thoughts warred. Sense urged her to keep distance, to remember what the McGraws meant. But her heart trembled under his gaze. There was no pity in it, no contempt. Only a steady seeing, as if he recognized her fully, not as shadow, but as flesh and soul. Later, when sleep finally took him, Eliza sat beneath the oil lamp, the name circling her mind like a curse and a promise alike. She knew from the moment it passed his lips, her life would never again rest in quiet obscurity. Beyond the walls, the prairie winds howled. Inside, memories stirred, doors long bolted, shifting in their hinges. She stood on a threshold. Step forward and it might be ruin. Stay behind, and it would be another lifetime buried. By dawn, Daniel could manage a few halting steps. He paused at the cracked window where once she had pressed her hand. "This house is cold," he murmured, "but it isn't empty." The words clutched at her heart. She did not know how long Daniel McGraw would remain, nor what storms his name would bring. But she knew this much. The silence that had been her only companion was broken forever. When the snow at last slipped from the sagging eaves and the prairie showed its sodden brown earth beneath, Eliza came to know what silence truly was. In the days after Daniel's departure, the cabin settled back into its old loneliness. She lit the fire herself, braced her shoulder against the rattling boards, listened to the echo of her own breath inside the four walls. Yet now the emptiness carried a different weight. It was not mere solitude. It was loss. She told herself Daniel had been only a stranger, a wounded cowboy dropped half dead at her door. He came, he left, and all that remained was a warm trace fading into memory. She forced herself back into the rhythm of small labors no one would contest, patching threadbare clothes, counting the eggs her hens still laid, splitting crooked logs to dry by the hearth. But at night, when the lamp shivered against the draught, she could not escape the memory of his eyes, pained yet steadfast, fixed on her as if trying to carve her face into his very mind. She thought it would end there. Until one evening, as the sun bled red along the ridge, hoofbeats rolled across the yard. Eliza doubted her own ears. No one had come through all that long winter. But the sound was real, each strike ringing against thawing mud. The door swung wide. Daniel McGraw stepped in, leaner, his face carved hard by fever and snow, yet his eyes burned bright. He spoke no greeting, only led his horse to the shed, then dropped a bundle of fresh-cut lumber on the porch. "Your roof leaks. I brought boards." With his sleeves rolled high, he set to work as if the cabin were his own. Eliza stood frozen, hands twisting the hem of her worn skirt. This was the man courted by judges and preachers, returned instead to the place townsfolk called cursed, the shack of a slave's daughter, where no decent soul should tread. From that day, Daniel returned often. He patched the roof, sealed the cracks, mended the henhouse, stacked wood clean and straight. Eliza, long practiced in doing everything alone, found herself disarmed by the presence of another pair of hands. But the strangeness soon warmed into something she scarcely dared name. They built a rhythm from the smallest things. She tended the hens, he split the logs. She cooked supper, he drew water from the well. When the wind shrieked, he braced the door so she could stoke the fire. In those moments, without vows or endearments, Eliza felt something she had never known, treated not as an outcast, nor as a burden, but simply as someone who belonged. The town did not keep its peace. Whispers rose quick as weeds. The slave's daughter has caught a McGraw. Men watched with envy and scorn, women with curled lips. At the market, Eliza overheard, "Men tire quick, he's just chasing novelty." She lowered her head, clutched her bundle tight, hurried home. Inside, though, she knew Daniel's gaze carried no jest. His silence was steady, not mocking. Yet trust was fragile in a world that had never allowed her to hold it for long. One stormy night, when she had nearly given up waiting, Daniel came late, leading a coal-black horse. "For you," he said. "Winter's easier with a good mount." Eliza froze. No one had ever given her such a gift. She stammered refusal, but he set the reins in her hands, his voice firm. "Not pity, because I want you to have it." Then he sat quietly at the bench, feeding the fire, his face aglow with a sincerity that stripped her doubt bare. Day by day, his presence wove itself into her life. He asked no questions of her past, pressed for no explanations. He was simply there, like the wind at the eaves, the creek murmuring beyond the field. And it was that quiet constancy that opened her heart. Still, the outside world sharpened its knives. One afternoon at the well, the dressmaker's wife leaned close, venom sweet on her tongue. "You think McGraw will marry a Negro girl? Don't fool yourself." Eliza bit her lip, pain slicing through her chest. That night she sat by the lamp, hands trembling in her lap, afraid that her fragile hope would shatter. Daniel broke the silence. "I don't care what they say," he told her, voice low but unyielding. "I came back for you, not them." Eliza studied him long, the firelight bright in his eyes like moonlit snow. She gave no reply, but her silence was confession enough. The storm passed, leaving the roof heavy with melting snow. Eliza woke to find Daniel had stoked the fire, the scent of coffee curling through the small kitchen. For the first time, her cabin smelled not of damp wood and ash, but of home. The town would go on whispering. But Eliza, once bowed, now began to lift her chin, because she was no longer alone. The man named McGraw had chosen to return, and in that return, against all odds, lay the strongest faith she had ever known. One quiet evening, wind drifted down from the mountains, coiling around the cabin roof like a restless spirit. Eliza set a bowl of hot soup on the table, steam rising thin as morning mist and brushing her weathered face. Daniel sat across from her, hat laid aside, his broad, work-roughened hands toying with the spoon in a hesitation that hung heavy between them. The only sounds were the snap of the fire and the nearness of their breathing, close enough to touch. Eliza spoke suddenly, her eyes fixed not on him, but on the dim walls, "I've never been kissed, never been chosen." Her voice quivered, a confession and an accusation woven together. The years of living beneath the town's scorn, of being named the daughter of slaves, had locked her into silence. No one had ever thought to ask what she wanted, or if she deserved to be loved. Daniel set his spoon aside. He lifted his hat, placed it square upon the table, and raised his eyes to hers. In the gray-blue depths, there was only truth. "Then we'll start slow." Eliza's head tilted, her heart battering against her chest. The words carried no vow, no grand promise, only a path, narrow but real, cutting through the cold stone walls around her. But in that fragile moment, the wind slammed against the porch. The door burst open, flung wide by the storm. A man strode in, snow crusted on his coat, boots striking the floor with heavy intent. Thomas McGraw, the eldest of the McGraws, tall, hard-jawed, his eyes cold as iron that fire could never soften. His gaze swept the shabby room before pinning on his younger brother. "Eliza." He said her name plain, stripped of courtesy, stripped of respect. "So this is where he's been crawling." The air froze solid. Eliza stood rigid, clutching the dish rag, while Daniel shifted as if to close the space between her and his brother. "What are you doing here?" Daniel asked, calm but taut. Thomas sneered. "Looking for you. A McGraw doesn't vanish for weeks just to mend some shack for the woman the whole town despises." Each word fell sharp as a blade. Eliza's teeth pressed into her lip, fighting the tremor that rose. She had borne whispers all her life, but from Thomas they cut deeper, dragging her shame into the open like a brand she could never wash away. Daniel rose slowly to his feet. "She saved my life, Thomas. You've no right to step in here and spit on her name." "Saved your life?" Thomas barked a laugh, harsh and echoing. "You think a McGraw needs the mercy of a slave's daughter?" "Don't stain our name, Daniel." Heat burned in Eliza's ears. The words struck like a slap. Every childhood slight came rushing back. The shopkeepers turning her away, the girls snickering behind hands, the doors shut in her face. And now, with Daniel watching, the wound was torn open again. But Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady, anchored deep. "The McGraw name isn't yours alone. I'll decide what it stands for." Thomas's jaw knotted, his fists tight. "You mean to defy me? For a woman the town would rather forget?" For a heartbeat, Eliza feared they'd come to blows across her table. But Daniel did not move to strike. He met his brother's eyes with a calm defiance, as if daring him without a fist lifted. This, Eliza knew, was the hinge of her life. If Daniel yielded, she would remain a shadow, shame carried in secret. If he stood, the world might burn, but it would be the first chance she had to be seen as more than a curse. At last, Thomas spat his words like gravel. "You'll regret it. Don't expect a single dollar from McGraw land if you keep with her." He turned, slammed the door wide, letting the storm sweep through before it closed on his back. Silence flooded back in, broken only by Eliza's shallow breath. Daniel laid his hand upon the table, steadying her with presence alone. "You heard him," he said softly, his voice iron beneath the calm. "From this night, I'm no longer his kin." Eliza's eyes filled with a tide of fear and wonder. "You don't have to. Not for me." He shook his head. "I do it because I choose. Because of us. Us. 2 letters, but warmer than any fire. Yet Eliza knew the town would not sleep quiet. Word of Thomas McGraw riding out to her door would spread like prairie fire, and they would face stares, whispers sharper than ever before. That night she lay awake, hearing the wind claw the walls, hearing Thomas's horse fade into the dark. For the first time, fear and hope tangled in her chest like barbed wire. If Daniel stayed, every other door would close on him. And if she let him in, the road ahead would be no less jagged than a winter pass. But also, for the first time, she realized a man had seen her, not as bloodline, not as curse, but as Eliza. Thomas McGraw filled the doorway, his frame blotting out the last light of day. His eyes gleamed with a chill that was not of the wind, but of arrogance forged in long-held power. That gaze fixed on Eliza, standing by the hearth, spoon trembling in her hand. "A black in this house," Thomas spat, "is nothing but a stain on the McGraw name." The room went still, broken only by the crack of firewood. Eliza held her spine straight, but her heart pounded like a drum against its cage. In a breath, childhood came flooding back. Those days she stood at fences while other children laughed, while she was driven off for the color of her skin. Shame she had long buried rose again, raw and merciless in his words. Daniel stepped forward, planting himself squarely between his brother and her, silent as a wall of stone. "Enough, Thomas." His voice did not rise, but carried the weight of iron. Thomas sneered. "You think shielding her will preserve the family's honor? She clings to this patch of earth for what it hides. I've heard the talk. There's water under this land." "Water, Daniel. In this country, worth more than gold. Don't fool yourself that she stays for sentiment. She wants McGraw fields to pass into colored hands." Eliza stiffened. She had never known of any spring beneath her soil. But the way Thomas spoke, casting her as a schemer, tightened something deep inside her chest. Daniel glanced at her, just for an instant, then answered clear. "Whether there's water or not, the land is hers. No one has the right to steal it." Rage flared in Thomas's face. "Have you forgotten our father's command? The McGraw name must stay clean. You'll drag it into the mud for a woman unworthy." The words cut deeper than any knife. Eliza nearly faltered. But Daniel took a step closer, meeting his brother's glare. "Honor isn't measured in skin, Thomas. Honor is how a man treats the weak. If father still lived, he'd know it." Silence drew taut as a bowstring. Eliza could hear her own heartbeat hammering. Thomas's voice came low, dangerous. "Stand with her, and you stand against your kin." Daniel's jaw set. "If family honor is nothing but pride and greed, then I'll stand against it." Eliza's shoulders trembled, not from fear, but from something fiercer. The knowledge that, for the first time, someone had chosen her side without shame. Thomas cast one last scalding look before turning. At the threshold, he left his threat. "This land, this woman, McGraws will have them, sooner or later." He slammed the door, wind bursting in, snuffing the lamp's flame. Darkness quivered around them. Daniel turned back, laying his hand firm on the table. "Don't be afraid," he murmured, though even he felt the chill of that promise. He knew Thomas too well. Such threats never passed idle. By morning, the town hummed with rumor. Whispers of underground water, of Thomas McGraw's intent to claim Eliza's land. When Eliza walked the market, eyes followed sharper than ever, not only for her color, but because she had become the spark in the McGraw's feud. Carrying her basket of eggs up the wooden steps, she heard a cackle behind her. The slave's daughter thinks she can stand beside a McGraw. Eliza said nothing, though her grip on the basket handle whitened her knuckles. That night, Daniel hammered fresh boards across the eaves. Sweat clung to his back as Eliza watched in silence. At last she spoke, voice low. "You don't have to. If you leave now, you'll keep your honor." Daniel turned, eyes steady. "What honor, Eliza? The kind that lets a woman be trampled? I want no part of it." Tears burned her eyes, but she swallowed them down. She had lived her life enduring. Yet now, for the first time, someone did not pity her. He stood beside her. Days later, another storm rolled in, snow slashing against the cabin. Amid the howl, hooves struck the yard. When the door opened, Thomas appeared again, fur cloak over his shoulders, face carved from stone. "Eliza," he said, "be wise. Sign the deed. You'll have gold enough to last. Refuse." His eyes flicked to Daniel. "And you'll drag him under with you." Eliza trembled, but Daniel's hand anchored firm on her shoulder. "We're not selling." The words rose louder than the gale itself. Thomas narrowed his eyes. "You'll regret this, Daniel. The McGraw name does not share blood with the lowborn." Then he vanished into the storm. That night, wind howled at the walls. Daniel stoked the fire high. Eliza sat close, watching the glow paint his face in stubborn light. "You can leave," she whispered. "Don't let me be the burden that breaks you." Daniel pressed another log into the flames, then sat beside her. His voice came steady, measured. "No one is a burden when the heart has chosen, and mine already has." Outside, the blizzard raged, but inside, Eliza felt an odd calm settle deep. Still, both knew the storm was not yet over. The true battle lay ahead. The shadow of honor, the honor Thomas claimed, would follow them, sharper than steel. Eliza met Daniel's gaze, firelight mirrored in his eyes. For the first time, she wondered if honor might mean something else entirely. Not a name, not blood, not gossip, but the courage to choose love, even when the whole world turns against it. And she knew their fight had only begun. Word of the clash inside Eliza's cabin spread like fire on dry grass. Within a day, all of Willow Creek was buzzing. Whispers filled the saloon corners, shop counters, even the wooden aisles of the church. Most townsfolk leaned to Thomas McGraw's side, not just because he bore the weighty McGraw name with its endless acres and cattle, but because he had given voice to what many thought in secret. A black woman, living alone on land rumored to hide a spring, was an offense to decency. Eliza knew those eyes well. She had lived beneath their half-shut lids since childhood, each glance measuring where she might stand, or if she belonged at all. But this time their judgment threatened more than her pride. It aimed to strip away the only roof left her after a lifetime of loss. Then, on Sunday morning, while the congregation sat in tight silence, Reverend Joseph rose. The old pastor, 4 decades tied to Willow Creek, was a man known for peace, never for meddling in quarrels. Yet his voice cracked through the hushed wooden hall like a bell. "You call Eliza Whitmore a stain," he declared, "but I tell you, this woman saved my wife from death." A murmur rolled. Reverend Joseph spoke of the fever that nearly took his beloved the year before when the town doctor despaired and neighbors had begun their mourning. Only Eliza remained, brewing herbs her mother had taught her, cooling the burning skin, sitting vigil night after night. Without her, the pastor said, I would have lost half my soul. For a breath, the church shifted. A few bowed heads, a few uneasy glances. Consciences stirred in the pews. But Eliza knew it would take more than quiet nods to turn the flood Thomas had unleashed. When the service ended, Thomas waited at the porch, his tall figure dark against the winter sky. His voice cut sharp as steel. Saved her? Or cast your spells like your kind always has? The slur landed like cold water dashed in Eliza's face. Around them, whispers swelled, some nodding, as if Thomas had spoken aloud the suspicion they'd long nursed. Daniel would not let her stand alone. He stepped forward, hand firm on her shoulder, his voice ringing like hammer on anvil. You can despise me, Thomas, but do not spit on this woman. She saved more than a life. She's kept fire on this land when the rest of us turned away. A few of the younger men glanced at Daniel, doubt flickering in their eyes. But Thomas only sneered, turning on his heel, boots grinding into the gravel like unfinished threat. From that day, the shadow deepened. Neighbors who once exchanged a word with Eliza now passed her with curt nods. Boys threw stones against her roof at night, laughing as they fled. Daniel came often with firewood, coal, salt, but she saw the strain in him, the tug between blood and heart. One evening, with the wind howling outside, Daniel set down a sack of meat and salt on her table. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke, low, firm. The Reverend told truth, but truth alone won't hold against men like Thomas. We need more than one witness. Eliza lifted her eyes. In his face she saw something new, not just the young man returned from storm, but one bracing for a greater storm still. In the days that followed, Daniel knocked on doors. He spoke of Eliza tending coughing children, of how she had shared her last corn with neighbors in the lean winter. Some listened, some shut their doors. But seeds were planted. Not all hearts belonged to Thomas. Eliza, though fearful, began to lift her head when she walked the market. She did not flinch from their stares, though each gaze pierced like a thorn. In her chest stirred a dawning sense. This was no longer about a cabin of warped boards, but about the right to claim her own dignity. Thomas, however, did not retreat. Her faint defense only sharpened his fury. One night, while Daniel was away, he came with 3 drunk men to her door. Their fists hammered the wood, their jeers splitting the dark. Eliza shook, but instead of hiding, she stood with knife in hand behind the barred door. They left with promises to return, their threats colder than the snow itself. When Daniel learned of it, his face darkened. He said little, only clasped her hand and swore it would not happen again. Yet she saw the fear in him, unmasked for the first time. Thomas would not stop, not until he had the spring or her silence. That night, firelight cast their shadows long and trembling across the walls. Eliza whispered, "What if truth is buried, no matter how we prove it?" Daniel's voice came slow, steady as oak. "Maybe it will be. But if we stay silent, we've already buried ourselves before anyone else can." Outside, the season's first snow fell, soft as ash, yet piling, relentless. And Eliza knew the fiercest storm was still ahead. The wind came keening off the western range, carrying the scorched tang of burnt grass. The moon lay hidden behind black clouds, only a few pale threads of light falling across the prairie. Then, in the heart of that darkness, fire erupted. An orange blaze tearing through Eliza's chicken coop, painting her small homestead in furious red. Wings beat frantically, shrieks filled the night, and the fire roared as though intent on swallowing breath itself. Eliza smelled the smoke first. She rushed to the porch, her heart slamming when she saw the coop engulfed, her meager hens, their eggs her only food, screaming in panic. For a heartbeat, she stood frozen. She had endured hunger, cold, and the contempt of the town, but never this, never such naked cruelty. Daniel burst out behind her, coat forgotten, hat flung aside. Without a word, he dove into the flames. Eliza screamed, reaching for him, but he was gone, swallowed by smoke. She hauled water, dousing the fire in pitiful splashes that hissed and vanished. Through stinging eyes, she glimpsed him, wrenching at the coop doors, arms full of terrified birds. Some stumbled free, others never would. Her skin chilled with sweat as the fire lashed higher. A gust sent sparks leaping toward the porch, and in that flare she saw him. A figure at the fence line. Tall, shoulders squared, cloak whipping in the wind. Thomas. She needed no proof. The fire was his doing, as much in spirit as in flame. But she had no time for fear. Daniel staggered, coughing, his body collapsing onto the ash-strewn ground. Eliza shrieked and ran to him, smoke clawing her lungs, strength drawn from desperation. She dragged him with all she had, arm across her shoulders, pulling him from the inferno. They fell hard by the well where the air was clearer. Daniel's face was smeared with soot, brows singed. But when she pressed her ear to his chest, a heartbeat thudded weak but steady. A sob broke from her lips, half joy, half anguish. The townsfolk gathered in the glow. Some muttered of stray sparks, others whispered of a deliberate hand. But no one spoke aloud. Their eyes lingered on Eliza, then slipped away. None stepped forward. They would not risk standing against McGraw. Eliza's mouth filled with blood from biting back her fury. The silence of the town was its own kind of violence, as deadly as the fire. Daniel stirred, voice cracked to a whisper. "Don't cry. I'm still here." His words, ragged and fragile, loosed her tears at last. She could not tell if she held him or if he held her from breaking. That night, she kept vigil at his bedside, washing the burns with cool water. Outside, the fire was gone, but the acrid stench clung heavy. She knew now this was more than mockery or rumor. Thomas did not just want her gone, he wanted her erased. Daniel lay restless, but even in sleep his hand clutched the hem of her dress, as if vowing never to let go. Eliza stared at that hand, and something lit inside her, not a blaze of destruction, but of survival. For the first time she knew she was no longer alone. At dawn, the prairie shone gold over blackened ash. The coop stood in ruins, the surviving hens scattered. Eliza worked with blistered hands to gather them, each movement a defiance. She was not only saving hens, she was proving no fire, no name, no man had the right to take her land, her life, from her. When Daniel woke, his voice rasped, "Thomas won't stop." Eliza met his gaze, eyes burning with a light rare and unyielding. "Then neither will we." The words, soft yet sharp as steel, carved a new beginning. Amid the ashes, both knew the true battle had only just begun. Eliza sat by the bedside, her hands clutching the frayed edge of the sheet. The oil lamp flickered, throwing her trembling shadow up the wall. Daniel lay there, breath ragged, his brow slick with cold sweat. The burns along his shoulder were bound, but the smoke still clawed at his lungs. She didn't know how to pray except to beg heaven not to steal away the one man who had ever dared to stand for her. Then, as if stirred from the brink, Daniel's hand moved. With a weak, fumbling motion, he reached into his coat, folded neatly beside the bed. From it he drew a paper, worn soft at the creases. His voice, raw and broken from the fire, rasped but steady. "In case I don't make it, you'll still have the land." Eliza froze. She opened the paper with shaking fingers. In the dim lamp glow, the bold lettering came clear. A deed. Rights to the underground water, signed over in her name. Her throat tightened. When did you do this?" A weary smile brushed Daniel's lips. "The day Thomas started sniffing around the water. I knew he wouldn't stop till he owned it, or used it to drive you out. I couldn't let him." The words cut deep, straight to the wound she had carried all her life, mocked, scorned, cast aside. And yet here, a man not only saw her, but placed the greatest trust he had in her hands. Her eyes brimmed, and she pressed the paper against her chest. "I'd rather lose all of it than lose you." The confession slipped raw, fierce, and true. Outside, the wind keened through the cracks, carrying the acrid scent of burnt timber. But inside, a new warmth had taken root. Word of Daniel's collapse spread through Willow Creek by morning. Folks muttered that it was the price of siding with a black woman. Yet some lowered their heads when they saw Eliza keeping vigil, her devotion plain as daylight. They said nothing, but in their silence flickered the start of something different. Respect. Thomas was not softened. Rage burned hotter in him than the fire he had set. His scheme had failed, and worse, rumor reached him that the deed was no longer in his grasp. One evening he strode into the shack, shadow filling the doorway. His eyes were as sharp as a drawn knife. "Brother," he said coldly, "you've betrayed your own blood. You put the name of a low-born wench on the deed that belongs to McGraw land." Daniel, pale but steady, forced himself upright. His gaze held Thomas's without flinching. "Not all blood carries honor. Eliza does." Behind him, Eliza's fingers gripped her skirt until her knuckles whitened. Yet instead of retreating, she stepped forward. "I never asked for gifts. I only hold what Daniel believed I could keep." Thomas barked a laugh, hollow and hard. "A Negro's name on that paper won't wash the stain from this house." The air thickened, but Daniel's voice rang low and resolute. "Stain lies not in her skin, Thomas, but in your greed." It was a hammer's strike. Thomas's jaw clenched. Then he spun, slamming the door so hard the walls quivered. His fury lingered in the silence long after his boots had gone. In the days that followed, Eliza took to the fields. She hauled water from the well, poured it over young corn, tended the scrawny stalk. Townsfolk saw her bent with labor yet unbroken, and the whispers shifted, no longer only scorn, but grudging wonder. "Maybe she's more than a shadow," some said. Daniel, still healing, worked beside her when he could. Words were few, but a glance, a shared weight, the brush of his hand on hers told all. Together, they bore the burden of the land. One afternoon, Reverend Joseph came by. He watched Daniel brace the charred fence while Eliza patched a leaking bucket at the trough. The old preacher nodded slowly. Men call honor the keeping of a name, but I see honor here, in two souls who refuse to let each other fall. Eliza lifted her head, eyes wet yet shining. Daniel's hand found her shoulder, firm and certain. That night, when the wind stilled, Eliza sat by the window, fingertips stroking the folded deed. Moonlight spilled through the curtain, pale as a witness. She remembered Daniel's rasp in the smoke. In case I don't make it. But he was still there, leaning against the bed frame, eyes steady on her. They did not know what storm Thomas would conjure next, nor what venom the town still held. But they knew this. They had chosen one another. And in the hard land of the West, sometimes that choice alone was enough to carve a new chapter of honor. Spring returned, the snowmelt running in small streams along the road into town. Willow trees pushed out tender shoots, sparrows flitted across weathered rooftops, and townsfolk gathered at the church on Sunday morning, their boots pressing into damp earth. The bell tolled steady, like the heartbeat of the whole community. In the wide yard before the chapel, Daniel McGraw walked at Eliza's side. He did not linger in shadows nor hide as he once had. His hand clasped hers, firm, unshaking. The moment seemed to freeze the air. Heads turned, eyes widened with shock, then hardened with fury. That black woman, scorned, whispered against, cast off, now stood openly at the side of a McGraw son. No words were spoken at first, but the silence carried the weight of judgment. A widow whispered behind her veil. A cattleman tugged his hat low, as if ashamed to witness it. Still, Daniel walked on, step by step, leading Eliza past the long pews where all could see. Up front, Thomas McGraw gripped his Bible so tight his knuckles blanched. His stare burned, equal parts shame and rage. Every threat, every scheme he had spun now lay undone by the defiance of his own blood. From the pulpit, Reverend Joseph paused mid-prayer, his kindly eyes sweeping over the congregation, stiff as stone. He gave the faintest nod, a wordless benediction of courage. Daniel drew a chair for Eliza and sat beside her, their hands still entwined. Eliza bowed her head, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt every whisper, every hiss of breath at her back like knives. Yet the warmth of Daniel's hand steadied her. For the first time, she did not feel alone in the sea of cold faces. The service began. Reverend's voice rose, but few looked heavenward. Most eyes clung to the couple in the middle pew. A cough, a muttered slur, a shuffle of boots cut the air. Daniel paid it no mind. He sat tall, his gaze fixed on the pulpit, calm as if the storm around them were but passing wind. Then the scripture reading came. Reverend set his Bible down, folded his hands, and his voice rang firm. The Lord does not see the color of skin nor measure by station. He sees only the heart and the deed. Who among us dares claim he is cleaner than another? The words fell heavy, stirring unease. A few eyes dropped to the floor. But Thomas rose, his voice slicing the stillness. You defend disgrace, Reverend? This town will be a laughingstock if we allow such a union. All eyes swung to him. Daniel rose in turn. His words were not shouted, but carved sharp and clear. Disgrace lies not in color. It lies in cowardice when hate rules where justice should. I stand here not to provoke, but to say Eliza Worth bows before no man in this room. The declaration rolled through the timbered walls like a strike of thunder. Eliza's eyes burned, tears threatening, but they were not tears of fear. They were of pride and of gratitude. Silence held, broken only by the creak of benches. A few elders nodded, tight-lipped but thoughtful. A young wife clasped her husband's hand, as though to remind him that love is holy in all forms. Yet there were still scowls, still hard stares promising trouble. Thomas turned away, boots hammering against the planks, leading a handful of men out into the daylight. Their departure left the sanctuary split. Anger, quiet reflection, and the faint stirrings of hope mingled in the air. When the service ended, spring sunlight spilled through the doorway, scattering gold across Eliza's hair. Daniel still held her hand as they stepped into the yard, the eyes of the town heavy upon them. The willow leaves trembled in the breeze, whispering that the season ahead would not be gentle, but it had begun. Eliza drew in a deep breath, tasting freedom in each step. Daniel bent close, his words just for her. "Are you ready?" Her nod was small, steady. Facing the town was only the beginning. Ahead lay shadows, hatred, trials unknown, but hand in hand, they would not turn back. Spring sunlight spilled across the church porch, mellow as honey, glinting off the worn shoulders of Daniel's coat and the simple folds of Eliza's dress. For a breathless moment, the sparrows in the willows hushed their chatter. The breeze stilled, as if all creation paused to make way for something fragile, holy, and new. Daniel set his hat aside. Calloused hands, hardened by seasons of labor, lifted to cradle Eliza's face. In his gaze there was no fear, no shame, only the resolve of a man who had chosen to stand in the storm for the woman he loved. Eliza trembled, not from dread, but from a heart unaccustomed to such tenderness. And then he bent, pressing his lips to hers, their first kiss. It was not loud, nor fevered, nor weighed with oaths. It was simple, steadfast, a vow spoken without words, that they would begin, slow but unyielding. In that soft meeting, Eliza tasted a peace she had never known, a peace as solid as the land itself, harsh yet life-giving. The town held its breath. A cough broke the silence. Silk skirts rustled in disapproval, and yet a few elders bowed their heads, silent witnesses to the truth that love, wherever it blooms, deserves reverence. Eliza drew back, eyes wet, hands trembling. She had dreamed of love as a distant tale, never her own. Yet here, before them all, Daniel gave it openly, without shame. That kiss was a spark, enough to warm a heart too long exiled in cold shadows. Turning to the crowd, Daniel spoke, not loud, but clear as a church bell. "She is the one I choose, and I will choose her again, today and always." The chapel hushed, the silence heavy as judgment. No cheers, no jeers, only the weight of waiting, testing their resolve. Daniel did not falter. He stood tall, hand entwined with Eliza's, two lives once sundered now bound fast. When the service ended, townsfolk drifted out, whispers rising like wind through dry grass. But among them Eliza caught other sounds. Gentle blessings murmured, approving nods from weathered women, quiet recognition in the eyes of men who knew loss. Not all turned away, and that was enough. Outside, beneath the blue sky, clouds drifted white and slow as a promise. Daniel's hand pressed lightly at the small of her back, a simple gesture, yet she felt sheltered. Her voice trembled, Aren't you afraid? With the whole town against us? He smiled, the smile of a man stripped by loss yet still unbroken. I fear only one thing, that you should face this world alone. Her lips quivered, heart flooding like a river loosed by thaw. She knew hatred lingered, Thomas still plotted, storms yet to come, but she would no longer stand alone. That afternoon, at the edge of their farmstead, Daniel paused by an old grapevine, dry and gnarled. He lifted a brittle cane. It looks dead, but as long as the root holds, spring will bring leaves again. Eliza laid her hand against the rough bark and understood. He spoke not only of the vine, but of them. That night, by lamplight, she wrote in her small book, her hand unsteady. Today, I learned what it is to be loved, not by words nor by promises afar, but by a kiss, gentle before the eyes of all. I am no longer invisible. Spring winds carried the scent of earth and wildflowers. Eliza rested her head on Daniel's shoulder. He said nothing, only pulled the quilt higher around her. In the quiet, both knew a new chapter had begun. A kiss, so small a thing, yet it had changed everything. The way the town saw them, the way Eliza saw herself. More than that, it had lit a lamp in their hearts, a light to guide them through storms yet unspent. In years to come, some would remember that day as a turning point, the day a black widow and a McGraw son defied family, prejudice, and fear, choosing love instead. And even now the story lingers, like an old hymn carried on prairie winds, reminding us that true strength lies not in wealth or name, but in daring to hold another's hand in the tempest and whisper, "We begin here." If this tale has stirred you, share your thoughts below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you can journey with us into more Wild West love stories, where love always finds a way to bloom, despite the years and the weight of the world.